Hi, and welcome to Finding Your Way Through Therapy, a proud member of the Sightcraft Network. The goal of this podcast is to demystify therapy, what can happen in therapy, and the wide array of conversations you can have in and about therapy. Through personal experiences, guests will talk about therapy, their experiences with it, and how psychology and therapy are present in many places in their lives, with lots of authenticity and a touch of humor. Here is your guest host, Courtney Romanowski.
GetFree.ai. Yes, you've heard me talk about it previously in other episodes, but I'm going to talk about it again because GetFree.ai is just a great service. Imagine being able to pay attention to your clients all the time instead of writing notes and making sure that the note's going to sound good and how are you going to write that note and things like that. GetFree.ai liberates you from making sure that you're writing what the client is saying, because it is keeping track of what you're saying and will create, after the end of every session, a progress note. But it goes above and beyond that. Not only does it create a progress note, it also gives you suggestions for goals, gives you even a mental status if you've asked questions around that, as well as being able to write a letter for your client to know what you talked about. So that's the great thing. It saves me time, it saves me a lot of aggravation, and it just speeds up the progress note process so well. And for $99 a month, I know that that's nothing. That's worth my time. That's worth my money. You know, the best part of it too is that if you want to go and put in the code Steve50 when you get the service, at the checkout code is Steve50, you get $50 off your first month. And if you get a whole year, you save a whole 10% for the whole year. So again, Steve50 at checkout for getfree.ai will give you $50 off for the first month. And like I said, get a full year, get 10% off. Get freed from writing notes, get freed from always scribbling while you're talking to a client, and just paying attention to your client so they win out, you win out, everybody wins. And I think that this is the greatest thing. And if you're up to a point where you got to change the treatment plan, well, the goals are generated for you. So getfree.ai, code Steve50 to save $50 on your first month.
All right. Hello, everybody. My name is Courtney Romanowski, co-host, guest host, whatever you want to call it, of Finding Your Way Through Therapy. Thank you again to Steve Bisson for letting me take over some of these episodes with a focus on creative arts therapy, expressive arts therapy. This is my fourth episode based on creative arts and the expressive arts therapies. My last episode was number 151 with Maya Benatar and her experiences as a music therapist. Thank you, Maya, for joining me for that. And today I have with me here Bed Hermin, a licensed mental health counselor in the state of Massachusetts and a registered expressive arts therapist with the International Association. Thank you, Bed, for joining me today.
Thanks so much for having me.
Yeah, I'm so excited to talk about expressive arts therapies and you as an expressive arts therapist. So I guess just to get started, who are you? How do you practice? What does it mean to be an expressive arts therapist? That's a loaded question, maybe, but
great questions. Lots of questions.
Yeah.
Rapid fire. The first one, depending on the I feel like it depends on the context, who I am, how I show up, who others people see me as. But within this context, I am a counselor, and I am one who's studied expressive arts therapy at Lesley University. So I have a master's in that. It's actually a master's in clinical mental health counseling and a specialization in expressive arts therapy. Some interesting history in that university, as the one who, like, basically a lot of the codification of expressive arts therapy came from there. And there were a few rifts actually in I want to say in the 90s it was, of whether to go fully clinical with the program as a way to get licensure in the state, or whether to stay as sort of an adjunct maybe modality or its own modality. But as it stands, I am licensed. I practice virtually exclusively right now online. And let's see, who I am, what was this? There were two other follow-up questions.
Yeah, I know. So maybe my first one would be for folks who are not familiar with expressive arts therapy and are hopefully listening to my episodes about what they are and getting to know them. What is expressive arts therapy?
Yes. Expressive arts therapy, in my humble opinion, is, as I mentioned to you before, one of my least favorite names for my most favorite therapeutic modality, mainly because it doesn't necessarily have to do with arts as we think of them. It's first and foremost a method of self-exploration, of healing, and not primarily entertainment, not primarily a modality that you think of with the arts when you think of the arts as, shows or music, concerts, museums. This is really less about the arts and more about the distilling of these modalities into their essences, which is creativity, attunement, embodiment, which is why I would call it intermodal polyaesthetic embodiment practices. And no one would remember that, but
can you say that one more time?
IPEP, intermodal polyaesthetic embodiment practices. Intermodal because we use all the arts. It's that's why I don't like saying arts, because many people who don't know what this modality is will say, oh, it has to do with drawing. Or it has to do with music, it has to do with art in some prescribed way. But the expressive arts therapy department is a intermodal, so it's all of the arts, creativity in any way that it comes. And there's often a emphasis on not just one art, not just one modality. So it might go from mark making to sound making to play within one session. We're looking at the self, how the self experiences suffering, how trauma is stored in the body through all these different intermodal ways. Polyaesthetic because the aesthetics matter. I think it's really important that we don't kind of throw away the beauty and the joy of these creative endeavors, especially mixed with the healing, into this very, what I'm thinking of as fluorescent light, white hallway, white padded wall approach to healing. We know that doesn't work. We've seen that not work historically. So intermodal then polyaesthetic, because it's many ways of finding beauty, many ways of interfacing with the aesthetic realm of the arts. Embodiment practices, embodiment because a lot of it is very much influenced by somatic practices, by dropping back into the body, not seeing the mind as just the more computational, computer-based way of approaching cognitive sciences, but really having it be an embodied healing practice, not theoretical, very much practical. And the practice at the end is the encouragement for anyone who seeks this type of counsel to employ it in their daily lives, to go out and do it, to practice, just like anything that we might do, whether it's driving a car or something creative like learning an instrument or doing taxes. That takes practice.
Yeah, we are constantly practicing every day, everything we do, right?
So that's why I would call it that. But expressive arts therapy is all that. This is not something that I've made up. This is really drawn from the principles and practices of the expressive arts therapy programs that were codified at Leslie in the 70s and 80s.
Yeah, and not to boil it down too simply, but I loved the how creativity is maybe one of the main focuses.
I would say the nerd in me wants to say neuroplasticity is the key. But that might not be as popular a term these days. But I would actually say that I would give it a tie between creativity and imagination.
Imagination.
I would say that those two together, hand in hand, are maybe one of the primary substrates of this whole concoction, if that makes sense.
Mm-hmm. So how do you practice this as a clinician? How do you take someone who maybe is so much in their brain, as some of us can so easily be in the world today, and help them get into their body, help them to practice this imaginative or imagination use?
Oh, there's so many ways.
Which I love.
Yeah, and I'm sure you know this also, but it's not anything that we don't know, but it so depends on the person. It's the other thing is this practice, and most of the therapy methods that you're going to see today are very heavily influenced by Carl Rogers and the person-centered approach. There's really even in some of the most rigorous of methods. I'm thinking of EMDR as one of them, which is very, I want to say, almost rote. Like you're reading a script as a therapist. You're not putting much of yourself, but you still tailor it to the individual so much. So the approach is really different for someone who lives in the world of thoughts or has some sort of spiral kind of hamster wheel thing going. A lot of it is just a very simple ask of like, what does that feel like in your body? Not everyone gets that though. That's not that's something that everyone can say like, oh, it lives in my head. So for those who have that going and are willing to explore that through analogy and metaphor, that starts to get you into a more embodied sense of the thoughts. So, okay, if you're going off of the image of a hamster wheel, then we can maybe draw it out, or maybe we're looking at circles and what it feels like to be making a circle. And as I'm leading someone in doing this, I say like, well, what do you notice when you're doing that? And they're like, oh, well, there's this like spiral motion going. And I realize that that's connected to my arm, which is connected to my chest. I'm like, where does that start? Does it start at your feet? They're like, maybe not. There's some ways into kind of getting from the thinking mind into the feeling body that involve process of elimination too. Sometimes I'm like, someone will be like, I don't know where I feel that or how I feel that. I'm like, well, do you feel it in your fingernails? Not a lot of people have said yes. Not everyone has said no. But
which again, like so personal, right? In that experience.
Exactly. It might be a series of questioning like that, like a Socratic method type of thing. And sometimes it's just sharing other people's experiences. HIPAA compliant always. I'm also a Scorpio, so I'll never say anything. And yeah, so sometimes it's just a matter of suggestion, a matter of play. I'm very playful in my approach. Sometimes seeing that can allow you to mirror that. And you're like, well, I'm feeling spiky just hearing about it. And it's like a spikiness, I swear, it's coming out of like my back. Like if I just had like porcupine quills and it's just like, oh. And then people, a participant might see that and be like, oh yeah, it is kind of like that. But my spikes are like dinosaur spikes, whatever it might be.
Yeah, I really love the mirroring, and I do some of the same approach with my clients of like, I'm feeling, like I'm noticing as we're doing this, like what's coming up for me. And it's like, oh yeah, like, oh no, that's not actually, but now I'm recognizing what is happening. Like, okay, cool.
Yeah.
And it can be a real awesome thing to be a part of. Seeing people who have been so much in their heads actually start to come down into their bodies and settle in. And not to say that it happens right away, right? So like anything else in therapy, sometimes this process can take time. Being able to be creative and play and imagination.
Yeah, absolutely.
But so I'm thinking too, to play devil's advocate, as I often say, with clients, if I was somebody who had no idea what expressive arts therapy looked like, or, listening to this podcast for the first time, I'm like, okay, so you're telling me that if I'm moving my body, I'm going to start to feel better, or if I understand that I'm moving from my shoulder, that's going to heal me somehow. What's your answer to something like that?
It's not.
Yeah. Nope.
Moving your shoulder may not do
Exactly.
anything. I would say to that person, well, you're still here.
Mm.
So like, let's try it. Let me ask you. I'm going to direct you. I'll drive a little bit and you tell me, does the landscape change as I'm going this way?
Mm.
Because that's the other thing is like, this isn't for everyone. There's no one size fits all. And there's so many options in America. I just came from uh, a little bit of a stint in Brazil and Colombia, and they don't have this
Mm.
plethora, this buffet of like different options in. It's a lot like more, the playing field is much more narrow. So if someone said to me, I don't think that's going to heal me, I'll be like, yeah, probably not. And if someone says, oh, how is that going to help? And I say, well, we've just moved a thought, which we don't truly, I was talking to a client about this recently, like we as humans we still don't exactly know what a thought is. We can measure them. We
Mm.
know what it looks like in the brain, in the body. We know what a neuron looks like, but truly it's just an energy packet on a purely physical level. A thought looks like that. It's
Mm.
quantified as that, but where it comes from, like self-consciousness in general, if you go back a little further, like none of us actually know. I mean, psychology is not one of the hard sciences. Hard sciences. I stand by that. I'll hang my hat on that. People will fight me on that. But it's why I like this discipline is that people can say like, I don't think that's going to work. And I can say that this energy packet that you are kind of caught in a mental cycle about, if we divert it in the silliest of ways, all of a
Mm.
sudden your attention, which is so important in this method, like where is your attention? Who's paying attention? I use IFS a lot. So sometimes
Mm.
it's parts that are kind of stuck in a thing. And if I bring a part into a shoulder and I tell you to move it, what has that done to these energy packets, you know?
Yeah.
And how can you start to find a way where, I don't know, if we're going off of maybe an annoyance that you're thinking of, this is annoying and it looks like a spiral. And I've moved it, and all of a sudden we've imagined that this is where this shoulder part is where it lives. And then every time you're mad from now on, for this is the practice part, from now on, to the extent of your ability, think of that anger as just sitting there. And maybe every time you get angry, you like kind of shake your shoulder a little bit, see what happens. And like, this is where some of the biology comes in. It's like when energies are moved or shift, there is some sort of relief somewhere,
Mm.
right?
Mm-hmm.
And the
Exactly.
more you practice moving like moving the energy, moving the flow, moving your attention, moving your awareness, the easier you can go between points of deep suffering and points of the deep okayness that you can have in life. And sometimes happy. I mean, happy is sick when you can get there,
Yeah.
like down with that. But yeah, in terms of the client who's like, I don't see how moving my shoulder will alleviate anything. To them, I might, you know, depending on how scientific you want to get, I'm like, all right, do you want me to describe to you the causes and conditions of uh like or like biological imprints, like how, you know, I would
Mm-hmm.
ask them. And if it's coming from, I also might ask like, what part of you wants to know? Is there a
Mm.
part of you that like really wants this angry thing to be over, and thinking, associating some silly, what looks silly thing with like a lack of being able to solve things? And then, you know, maybe talking that part, where does that part live? Does
Yeah.
that
Yeah.
make sense? I don't know.
It,
Sometimes, you know, it's funny. Like sometimes I say these things, it makes so much sense in my head. And
mhm.
sometimes when I say it, it doesn't. But I also would say that easily half my clients on like a really full caseload, easily half my clients are like, did that make any sense? Did I say, did that make sense? And to me as a clinician, I'm like, no, that made total sense.
All of the sense. Mhm.
100% dollars out of that. Like, I also have a lot of clients who have been frustrated growing up in a world that does not fit the mental emotional health that they're trying to achieve. It's a wrong, it's a square peg in a round hole. These systems and this society isn't conducive to a lot of people's well-being.
Absolutely.
So
Absolutely.
there's a lot of like, no one's ever understood when I say like, this feels pink. And I'm like, no, I get that. So
Totally. And, I've latched on to, this idea that like, we're not as clinicians, and, I will speak for myself, but from you and I talking, and even I checked out your website, you know, my job isn't to fix someone, right? Or to help them fix themselves or be better, or there's so many different words that are used, but like this idea that there's something wrong and I need to do something about it, so then I'm better and everything is going to be okay. Thoughts on that?
Well, I can weave this in with one of the other questions that we were talking about before the recording began. But it's really important to me, and I'll tie it in with a little bit of my upbringing as a Buddhist, to recognize that so much of our experience is based on causes and conditions, and not some responsible entity within ourselves to make everything perfect or fix. So when I'm working on my motorcycle, I can just go in and the screw is this way, and I have to like adjust some pedal thing. I don't know, like they're just like all these little things, and I know if I put this here, it'll work. And neurons are fantastically not like that.
Yes.
They work with a body that's incredibly dynamic and is constantly being acted upon by environmental causes, physical, emotional, all that stuff. So a lot of my Buddhist upbringing has focused also on this idea of perceiving and discerning our actions, our thoughts, and our being in this world as within this confluence of forces, this idea of dependent origination, like interdependence, and everything kind of going on. So it would be silly for me as one person to go in and fix any one thing, but I can help create an environment that is conducive to encouraging causes and condition of healing, of compassion to manifest, right? So it's much more of that approach in my work.
It sounds like in life too. It's just
And life.
yeah.
It's really nice to have happened upon a career path that allows me to be fully me. And also, like, I don't have to code switch. It's amazing, especially now that I'm not in the community mental health world and I'm just doing private practice. I can just be me. It's awesome.
Wow, what a wonderful world. So speaking of, getting out of community health versus being in private practice, what has that transition been like for you as a clinician, as an expressive arts therapist?
Stressful, challenging, heartbreaking, liberating also. Oh, it's just been all of it. It's been everything. It depends on like which part of the whole thing, but there's a fair bit of maybe, what to say, it feels like right now when I'm thinking of it, it feels just like this really big stew of like all these different things, and they're all bubbling, and it's like hot, and some of the ingredients feel similar or different, but it's definitely this like sort of churned up, maybe not a stew, maybe it's even like a cauldron. Like that's a big question. I'm like, which ingredient do you want me to pull out? But yeah, it's been a lot. I guess I don't know if that's helpful, but it's been a lot.
I mean, as somebody who's gone front, has had a similar trajectory. I don't know, my experience was, and maybe just where I was in my life at the time. Being in community health felt great because I was helping people who maybe didn't have access to support otherwise, or didn't have anybody else on their side to turn to. But as a dance movement therapist, I wasn't sure how to not fit inside that box in a way that felt true to myself. Whereas now in private practice, I feel I can be a little bit more true to myself, but the guilt of who I can work with, if that makes sense, because the guilt is rising up, but I have to pay my bills and I have to make sure that I can do XYZ, and maybe I have a few sliding scale spots open, but I can't do it as much as I would like to be able to, or there's a little bit more of a seesaw with that. That's not the right image exactly, but anyways, so that's kind of been some of my journey with that. But it feels good to be true to myself as a movement therapist, more so.
Yeah, absolutely.
Right.
Well, it reminds me of also the education system, where when I was I was living in Brooklyn for about 6 years before coming back to grad school. And at one point, when I was getting disillusioned with the art scene and what it would take to be a professional artist and things like that, it was brought to my attention that I could either go into teaching, you could teach art or you could be an art therapist. And I didn't know what an art therapist was at the time. And then a very dear friend of mine who was an adjunct, I think still is an adjunct professor at Lesley, introduced me to this other, like one creative discipline removed from the arts and expressive arts. And I was like, oh, I do music and art and drama and all these things, and there's a discipline that encourages the movement between all of these. And having such an authentic, as you may have had as a dance movement therapist, like an authentic, like real kind of flourishing of what that method is, and then getting into a system which I feel is actually much like the education system, like the public education systems of well, we can only have half an hour of an elective. Some kids don't have art classes at all, or dance classes at all. And I think part of my move into expressive arts therapy versus becoming a creative arts teacher was trying to get away from those kind of rigid systems that don't allow personal flourishing. And then the CMHC world looked a lot like the public school system. So I was trying to avoid, and I was like, oh, but it's it's systemic. It's turned out in a certain way. You're meant to be making some sort of I don't know, sometimes I remember someone saying the CMHCs are actually just there to placate the government's kind of desire to make sure that more liberal people vote for them or something. A very cynical view of so you can get the cynics who are like, well, the CMHCs are just there to help a small portion and make it seem like the government is doing their job to help the population, and then creating an entire generation of burnt out clinicians who can't be themselves. So I mean, I'm thinking of the one very, very cynical person, which is my father. But yeah, just sort of being like, oh yeah, this isn't the community mental health scene as it is, funded by governments who try to fund other things more. Just isn't a good environment for a lot of reasons for a lot of people. And still there's some amazing people working there that'll never leave. And I'm like, y'all do it. It's amazing.
Yeah, no, there's some wonderful clinicians out there who are doing the good work.
Yeah. How long were you in the community setting?
Not that long. I want to say a year, maybe a little less. And then I went into a couple different partial hospitalization programs before going to private practice.
Did you ever do inpatient?
No, never inpatient. Have you
Mm.
done inpatient?
No, and the way some of my clients now who are outpatient talk about their experiences being hospitalized for mental health issues makes me want to just like tear down all of
Mm-hmm.
it.
Mm-hmm. Again, there are some wonderful clinicians out there who are doing that hard work, but it's not set up
Mhm.
for the work that needs to be done for these
Yeah,
folks.
I'd agree with that.
Hmm. But just on just to kind of get back to therapy being available, expressive arts therapy being available to folks who maybe can't find it or can't come to it on their own or because of I don't know how to form that question, but like just how do you see expressive arts therapy becoming more equitable to our world?
It would take a serious rebranding.
Yeah.
Our world being a capitalist world.
Hmm.
I really
Hmm.
think that the right person could rebrand it and sell it in a beautiful way, and that will probably not be me.
I was gonna say maybe it's you.
No, I don't know if I'm up to the task. I really do think that a lot of what becomes affordable, accessible, mainstream has had a serious rebranding by someone who wants to make a lot of money. Again, I'm being
Mm,
hella cynical, I get it. But think of the punk music, like the punk
mm,
movement and
hmm.
punk music in general. Like you can see people wearing a Ramones shirt that they bought for like $50 that has some rhinestones on it. I've seen that in New York,
Mm,
and you're like,
hmm.
this was something that was not accessible to everyone, that only a few people could find, and really got a rebranding, got redistributed, got resold. And I mean, like, I'll say that the uncynical, like the more positive way,
Yes.
is like, no, thinking of people who provide amazing representation in uh in the world. Rain Dove is a
Mm,
genderqueer model who was like, yeah, I think Rain says that it's like gender capitalism or something, and for what it's worth, has reached a really broad market on social media, not mainstream yet, and but has been featured on a lot of magazines. I
mm,
think a lot of the drag scene has, RuPaul's drag show. You could ask people around the country, and they might have heard of it, right? So,
hmm.
but all of that took a little bit of calculation on the part of others, and this is where I think of that interdependence of like who's making it popular, who's getting the word out, who's working with hospitals in a different way. I can hear all my professors being like, that's the wrong answer. It's research.
Right,
Because that's the
right.
other one,
Yep.
obviously, is
Hmm.
like EMDR, CBT, all of these ones that are like the go-tos are there because they have a lot of evidence-based
Yeah.
research. My problem with that is that a lot of these methods are qualitative, and unless science gets real compassionate real quick,
Mm-hmm.
we're not going to find a lot of the types of research that are going to be, again, palatable, marketable.
Mm.
I don't know. That's my first. I'm like, part of me is like, man, if I maybe I should think about this for the next month. Hit me up in a
Okay.
month and I'll have a completely different answer.
Well, sure, of course. And yeah, the research piece, American Dance Therapy Association is, constantly asking us, start doing the research, start writing the articles, this, that, and the other thing so that we can get it out there and
Yeah.
for good and for great and for also just feeling a little cynical, like, but like, why can't the world just, I know the world can't just know, but like we as a people, as a world have been practicing art and music and dance and drama and for ages, right? Like we know it heals, we know it works, we know it brings people together.
I mean, that's the other thing though. I read a lot of the politics of therapy, and like,
Mm,
is that what mainstream society wants? Because a really healed, really creative, really compassionate society does not go out and spend recklessly. It does
right.
not go
Yeah.
out and buy guns. It does not Someone who is plagued by something and really is motivated in the creative and imaginative sense goes and makes a movie about something, does not go and act on the thing. Someone who is, I mean, like, you think of artists who have had the, you know, the opportunity to really delve into their work. And I mean, so a lot of questionable artists out there also doing bad
Sure.
stuff. And I can't think of like how much worse it would be if they didn't have that outlet. But yeah, I don't think that it, in a lot of the books that are exploring mental health, emotional health in light of political and basically, yeah, political and cultural systems, is like, who does it really behoove to have a society that's creative and expressive and joyful? And also, I guess part of me thinks of this sense that like it would mean that a lot of mainstream society would have to admit that they're wrong about the way they've been shepherding us into these new eras of technologies, of globalization, all these things. And I don't know how many establishments are going to be like, oh yeah, no, this suicide rate, definitely our fault. Like, that was our fault. We got to change. So, and that's why sometimes when I talk to clients, I'll be upfront. I'm like, the word work, employment as a standard of how your mental health is comes up like 400 some odd times. I can't remember the right number, but it comes up a lot as a standard. Like, and the DSM in the US is like our Bible, unfortunately.
Yeah.
I often in my intakes will tell clients, like, okay, so this intake is highly clinical and it is our offering to the gods of insurance. May they pay for all of your services. And like, I'm so sorry, I have to breeze through your deep trauma history and be like, can you go to work because of this? How well are you working? Can you sleep? Can you sleep? Because if you're not sleeping, you probably can't be a functioning member of society. And like, that's the metric from the angle of this book.
Yeah. Eek. Sorry, I have to put a name on this as to what is going on with you. Yeah.
So I think that's part of the, like, will it get to the point where everyone knows about it? I mean, unless society does a 180, but I don't see it happening anytime soon.
Not the answer I was looking for, Bed, but thanks. I'm just kidding. I'm just kidding. Want it to happen tomorrow.
You were like half my clients. Like, sorry, it's probably gonna feel really bad to like truly feel your feelings. I swear, in 2 months it'll feel different.
Yeah.
That's so not the answer that I want. Can I redo my answer?
Sure, if you have
Okay, sick. So my other answer is in about 10 years, this will be so common because there will have been just like a break in the way that we associate mental health and not like this clinical status. We're going to like really start to see mental health just as it seeped over from like a little bit the really disturbed few into like, now it's not taboo to have a therapist. That's just going to keep going. So we're going to start seeing more clinicians in the classrooms, clinicians, maybe more response teams on emergency units. We'll employ a clinician. I mean, if we got a crossing guard, why not have a clinical mental health counselor next to that crossing guard saying hi to all the irate moms who like are so tired because they don't, and just like have this fostering mass proliferation of like creativity, attunement, embodiment, compassion. I give it like 10 years.
Okay, so we'll check back in 10 years.
Sick.
We also went from one extreme to the other, and I love it. We can play with that.
I mean, it's good to have those extremes because reality always falls somewhere in the middle. So for the listeners out there, take those two extremes. Do not give either credence, and like find your own way in the middle somehow. That's Buddhist.
That's
sure.
There you go.
It's the middle way.
We have come full circle. So I was gonna, how do we go from this part in our conversation where like how can we, I always ask my guests 4 times now, to the people who are listening, Any encouragement or any advice on if they're curious about expressive arts therapy or therapy in general, or
My advice for someone who's curious about therapy in general is to not get attached to any one thing as being the one therapy that's the best, that's the right one. You can really spend a lot of time researching everything until you and you can also do you can almost like do the Tinder of trying to find a clinical mental health counselor, because you're just like, oh, I can get a free consultation. It's like it's almost like a first date. I'm like, oh my God, you have 15 minutes to decide like whether you want to get real intimate with this person. And there's no need to get stuck on a thing. You know, someone who's interested in exploring the possibility of therapy in general, yeah, try a bunch of things. Most of us clinicians, and I would hazard a guess that any good clinician is not going to get offended if you do a consult and you're like, you are not going to be helpful to me. And also, I think within the like, don't get stuck is, you know, if you're doing this for the benefit of yourself and others, like try a bunch of it. I know some people who had one therapist and it's like, oh, it was the perfect therapy right off the bat, and they saw that person for a short amount of time, got over the thing that they needed support around, got unstuck. Great. It took me 5-6 therapists, 5, something like that, to find someone who I'm like, yeah, this person is so supportive and I'm so comfortable exploring all these different vulnerable parts with. And I think that that's what the new sort of contemporary world of therapy is starting to show, is that method aside, like you can really find the right community if it's group therapy, or the right person to help you with cultivating those causes and conditions for happiness and well-being.
So important to find the right person, community.
Also, my super recommendation is, if you don't feel good at a therapy session like 3 times in a row, like good with the person, like definitely bail. Like there's nothing wrong with you. I see people who are like, wow, tell me about their previous therapist. I'm like, man, you gotta get out of there if it's not working. There's a lot of us.
There are, yeah. And not that maybe the therapy itself is going to feel good, or what you're talking about exploring is going to feel good, but if the therapist isn't leaving you with a good, heard, supported feeling at the end of sessions, then
yeah,
it might be time to try somebody else.
Yeah. In terms of finding expressive arts therapists, I don't know. I mean, there is iata.org, and there's some directories. And there's a lot of people who have a degree in expressive arts therapy who just do psychodynamic talk therapy, but they're a little more creative about it. Actually, a fair amount of my clients, we just do talk therapy for a number of reasons. It's not exclusively that I'm really much more faithful to the original method. So I'm always trying to pull you back into this creative realm. But I know people who just use it sort of as an adjunct for working through stuff. But yeah, it's all different. It's all unique, and it can all be tailored to you to meet your needs. It's a really interesting discipline, and it's unlike any other relationship you'll have with any other, like you just don't see that kind of relationship in family and friends, where someone's really, their motivation, their reason to be in community with you is to support you, and you don't have to worry about being judged or worry about giving back or worry about that dynamic, because we're here to help you, and we're here to, like, whatever that means to you, get you to your, I don't know, your most authentic self, core self. Then I'm going back into person-centered. Some people just like want to be deeply okay, and some people really need to have a significant perspective shift away from really some unfair and unimaginable situations of suffering. And like, we're here to help.
And it's an honor to be there with them.
For sure. That's a great word. I feel very honored
Very honored.
And really, yeah, very honored to be helping folks, to be called on to share in that journey is for sure that.
It really is. I mean, to be with somebody when they are being their most vulnerable self, either in sadness or fear, or anger, or in happiness and silliness and creative, it's really awesome experience to be a part of. And like you said, I love not expecting anything back. And just something just to kind of go back to something you said really early, like, why not try expressive arts therapy? Why not? See what happens.
Yeah.
It's a different try.
Yeah.
Well, but I am noticing the time, so we still have a few more minutes, but I wanted to ask if there's anything else about being an expressive arts therapist or about the use of that you want to make sure people hear from you.
I mean, I don't think I can point to any one thing. Just like revisiting that point from earlier of like, this is not an end all be all practice. This is not recommended for everyone in the world. Also, a lot of people will try to support that, but I really think that I really think that the only thing I can think of right now is that quote from Angerman, and I can't do it specifically. I don't have like it verbatim, but it's like 80% of the times it works 100% of the time. And I'm like thinking of like for a caseload of highly tailored people who have come to me specifically for these methods, it works great. So yeah, I mean, I think that if traditional methods of therapy haven't worked for you in the past, if you're looking to engage in life in a way that's more authentic to the way we were brought into this world, with sort of openness and imagination and play, and sort of looking at things really, really differently, if you're looking to deconstruct the habitual patterns that society is really ingrained in us, it can be a great method.
Perfect. I think that's a great way to wrap up this episode together. Thank you. For folks who are looking to get in touch with you, how can they do that? Where can they find you?
Counseling.bedhermin.com, or you can, I'm pretty sure there aren't that many Bed Hermins on the internet, so I'm sure if you just pop in Bed Hermin to your preferred search engine, you can find it. But definitely my website, counseling.bedhermin.com, and my email, which is also listed there, is bedhermin@outlook.com.
Great.
Happy to get in touch, happy to answer questions. And I would be remiss if I can hear my marketing coach be like, you do have social media too. Counseling.bedhermin on Instagram. I don't post very much, but it's there. That's for, that one's for Larry over at Score Boston. Thank you.
Thanks, Larry. Yeah, we'll definitely include the links in our show notes and everything. But
fantastic. Thank you so much for having me on. I love talking about this stuff. Happy to be here.
Yeah, thank you, Bed, so much. I'm so glad we can get together and do this. And thank you everybody for listening. Next episode is with Steve, and I believe he's going to be getting the mental men back together, which is always a great time. So thanks again, and see you soon.
Please like, subscribe, and follow this podcast on your favorite platform. A glowing review is always helpful. And as a reminder, this podcast is for informational, educational, and entertainment purposes only. If you're struggling with a mental health or substance abuse issue, please reach out to a professional counselor for consultation. If you are in a mental health crisis, call 988 for assistance. This number is available in the United States and Canada.